I was playing D&D this past weekend, and it got me thinking about something really interesting here. Something that I don't think most people think of in their day-to-day life. As an exercise, think of like the biggest franchises you can think of. Pretty common ones come to mind. You think of like Marvel, you think of like Iron Man and superheroes and all this stuff. You think of like Disney and Pixar and all these cartoons. You even think of Star Wars. Star Wars is huge, huge franchise. All these movies, so much money's been made off this. Try making a Superman movie, or try making an Iron Man movie. Try making a Star Wars movie. You know what I mean? It's not gonna happen. And that's because of our current state of affairs and copyright control. All these franchises have these giant fictional narrative universes that everyone knows all about. But there's one special one that you already know all about, but it's special and it's different from all the rest, and that is the shared fantasy universe. It's kind of like the open source of fiction right now. Everyone needs to take a moment to appreciate the shared fantasy universe. It's because it has a deep-rooted history in human culture. Dragons, elves, dwarves, all this stuff. These concepts have been around in folklore and oral and written storytelling, have been passed down from generation to generation and lead us to today, and lead us to incredible pieces of content that everyone knows and loves, like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Stranger Things. When the kids open the books, the D&D books and Stranger Things, and look up the Demigorgon, and they look up the Mind Flayer. Yeah, well, maybe it's not actually a Demigorgon, and maybe it's not actually a Mind Flayer. But the thing is they're using, and they're tapping into this shared fantasy universe to create new stories. This shared fantasy universe is the one that everyone gets to adapt and explore and exploit for their own purposes. I really like the phrase open source of fiction, because it does a really good job explaining its role and its significance. Everyone thinks of Game of Thrones as a franchise within itself, but really at its core, Game of Thrones is no more than Lord of the Rings fan fiction. I mean, that is what happened. George R.R. Martin read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and was like, you know what? I love this universe. I'm gonna make my own version of it. And what's cool is this all kind of comes back to Dungeons and Dragons, because Dungeons and Dragons is a storytelling tool set within this universe. When you watch Game of Thrones, you're like, oh, well, I know how this universe operates. Well, there's obviously some magic, there's some dragons, there's some castles, we get it, and we're not concerned about that stuff. We're just thinking about the characters within that story. But we live in a time of very intense copyright control. And there's a lot of people out there who, if had the opportunity to somehow own part of this fantasy universe, they would prevent other people from adapting it and using it as their own.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about learning, about education, about learning how to do what you want to do. In particular, right now I'm going to talk about learning how to do filmmaking. So this video is sponsored by Skillshare. I actually do a lot of my learning online from other people who are gracious enough to share their skills and their knowledge with not only me, but anybody else who's looking it up. I know a lot of you are interested in filmmaking, are filmmakers yourselves. You might find this part a little bit useful. There's actually a couple interesting video tutorials that I actually looked up on Skillshare before making this video. One was by a guy named Phil Ebner, which is actually how to make your webcam videos look good. Now, if you guys have followed us on Patreon and been part of the Hangouts, our video quality on the Hangouts isn't always the best, but now that I watch this tutorial, it's gonna be better. Back in the day when I was learning how to make videos, how to make movies, I mean, I still am. You never stop learning. When I was really kind of cutting my teeth on all this stuff with Sam, we would spend a lot of time reading lessons and tutorials from other people online. There wasn't a whole lot of actual nitty-gritty filmmaking teaching happening in our high school. We didn't really have books that delved into that kind of stuff. The best way for us to learn was to actually go online and learn from other people that were doing it, who were gracious enough to share their skills and their knowledge with us. Back when I was younger, like 14, 15 years old, Sam and I were learning how to make videos and do visual effects. When we made our Star Wars fan film, which is on our Corridor channel, we didn't know how to make lightsabers. We needed to learn how to do lightsabers. Ryan Weber, at the time, had made a great lightsaber tutorial effects on how to do them. From learning from his skills, we were able to do lightsabers. Something like Skillshare is great for that kind of learning process. If you want to learn from other people sharing their stuff online, especially in a very clean, curated, presented way, Skillshare is perfect for that. There's a link in the description below. It's a free 2-month trial membership. They have a lot of lessons. They actually have over 15,000 lessons on the site covering a huge range of topics. If you want to check it out, you can watch a lot of videos in 2 months, so you can find out if it's actually something that you find useful or not. That's the speed of my education that you hear revving up.
Just imagine if someone managed to copyright dragons. Like imagine where that would put us today. All the works and all the narratives that wouldn't exist because of that. I think it's probably time to talk a little bit about copyright law, because it's very important. When you're dealing with fiction and works of art here, copyright protects the creators of that work. When the US first had its copyright laws, copyright only lasted for 14 years. Okay? And now I admit, that's pretty short. That's not even that long. Eventually, it was extended to about 56 years by around 1909. And you know what, honestly, if you write a work of fiction or create a piece of art, 56 years of protection that says that work is solely yours is probably enough, because 56 years, that's more than a generation. So if you create something, you are set for the rest of your life, but as we all know, that's changed. So there's this thing called the Mickey Mouse curve that's kind of interesting, and if you look at it, you can see that every single time the character of Mickey Mouse is about to lose its copyright law extends by decades. And obviously it's not a coincidence, and that's because Disney created a character and they wanted to own that character far longer than what they were legally allowed to. So what did they do? They lobbied Congress, they changed the law. And if you look at this curve, you see it makes sense, because from a business standpoint, Mickey Mouse is an asset. A lot of people look at Disney movies and these stories and go, oh, well, they are beloved stories. These are money-making machines. If you imagine a world where copyright law somehow didn't extend, Disney would be a fraction of the size they are today. First time Mickey Mouse was going to expire for copyright, they changed the law to say rather than 56 years, copyright would last the author's lifetime plus 50 years. So if I came up with a cool character, I would gain the copyright for it for my entire lifetime and then add 50 years onto that. But that wasn't long enough, because around 1998, they had to change copyright law again. So rather than just being the author's life plus 50 years, it's now the author's life plus 70 years, or 120 years, whatever's greater. Now that was in 1998, and that was the last time US copyright law was defined, which means that Mickey Mouse is going to expire again in 2023, 5 years from now. Are we going to see copyright law extend because of Disney's lobbying on Congress? Obviously. Obviously. They've done it twice before. They're gonna do it a third time. They are the largest media company. They're the largest narrative company in the world. But the thing is that what this is doing, though, it's turning these stories that people tell each other, things that become public works effectively, and turning them into privatized properties. But if you look at how Disney got their start by taking shared fantasy stories, by using fairy tales. They all their first stories, like Snow White, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, Pinocchio, basically in the public domain. And they used those, they took them and they adapted them, and then they profited off them. And they founded their empire on this. Now for them to start like that, and then flip and start actively working against copyright law, so it's harder for other people to do that, it feels a little unfair. It feels a little false. Disney's been around for decades, and if copyright law was the same today as it was when they started, well, a lot of the stories that they've adapted or helped create would be in the public domain and allow other people to adapt them and work with them and cherish them in their own unique ways. Everything we know about copyright law today points towards why the shared fantasy universe is one of the most crucial and important things we can hold on to right now. I personally believe in copyright. I think it's a good thing. I don't think this is not about whether copyright is good or bad, because it definitely protects our work. We have a YouTube channel, we create content. Obviously, we should be the people to profit off it since we created it. But when does that end? When should that end? At what point do our stories become yours? And that's the real question here. You hear a story from a friend and you tell that to another friend and you tell that to another friend, and it changes and it adapts. It stops becoming my story, it starts becoming your story. When I was playing D&D that last weekend, we had a great time. I thrust people into a brand new story, brand new setting, brand new characters. In D&D, you're encountering monsters, but you're running around with magical swords. There's all this lore. Somehow, for some reason, they knew exactly how everything worked. And that's because D&D is in this shared fantasy universe. And I kind of came to that realization then, when it was like, wait a second, the rules and the stories and the creatures that are all within these books, we already all know. This is something that everyone owns. These stories, they're ours. They're not owned by anyone. You're working on something or you want to think of cool ideas. Honestly, picking up one of these books, it's not a bad place to start.